Hollywood red zone tracking the suspect.
Lucrative black market for industrial-grade urea and efficiency. Fatality.
In the near future, Los Angeles faces an all-time high crime rate, which causes widespread homelessness and unemployment, which has pushed the city into a full-scale crime epidemic. In response, the Department of Justice introduces the Mercy Court, a radical system where capital offenders are judged by artificial intelligence. In 2 years after its implementation, the Mercy Court has convicted and executed 18 individuals. As a result, the city's crime rate has dropped by 68%. Now, Chris Raven, an LAPD detective from the Robbery Homicide Division, wakes up inside the Mercy Court. Judge Maddox informs Chris that she will be presiding over his trial. Confused, Chris asks the judge why he is there. Maddox finally reveals that he is on trial for the murder of his wife, Nicole Raven. She accesses the police evidence file and plays the footage. The officer asks Nicole who stabbed her. With her final breath, Nicole whispers, "Chris." Maddox informs Chris that the court will now present an opening statement outlining his ties to the victim. She enables voice commands and touch-sensitive controls so he can do some research. He searches for Nicole Raven and finds a news video reporting Chris's arrest. The reporter also explains that Chris and his partner, Jock Dio, were early supporters of the Mercy program, and that Chris was responsible for bringing the first participant, David Webb, to Mercy Court 2 years earlier. She then opens the municipal cloud, which every citizen and organization is legally required to connect their devices to it. She tells Chris she will have full access to the cloud during the trial and informs him that he can use this resource to prove his innocence. However, if he is found guilty, he will be executed in 90 minutes by a sonic fatal pulse. Maddox then summarizes Chris's activities from earlier this morning. He arrived at work at 8:51 a.m., but instead of going inside, he turned around and returned home. Doorbell camera shows Chris asking Nicole to open the door, but she doesn't. Chris lets himself in with his key, and Nicole begins yelling at him. Shortly after he left, Britt returned home from a sleepover and discovered Nicole's body. She continues, explaining that after leaving the house, Chris went straight to a bar and drank heavily. In the video, officers attempt to arrest Chris. He resists, but they eventually manage to handcuff him.
Chris asks if he can speak to Britt. Maddox informs him that if he wants to contact her, he must submit a request first. Chris nods and Maddox sends a formal request on his behalf. She informs him that court protocol allows him to contact his sponsor. Rob Nelson answers the call. Rob says everyone at the company is shocked by Nicole's death. Chris admits he can't remember what happened. Chris insists he didn't kill Nicole, but before he can say more, Maddox abruptly ends the call, stating that the purpose of the call was to only address his relapse and he failed to use the support offered. Chris argues that Rob knows how happy he and Nicole were, but Maddox responds with a faint smile. She plays a video showing Chris and Nicole's past. After 3 years of dating, they marry, and a year later they welcome their daughter, Britt. For several years, Chris's life appears normal and stable, until Maddox highlights a traumatic incident on duty in which his partner, Ray, was killed. Then Maddox reveals that over the past 6 months, Nicole had sent 57 messages to friends and family about Chris losing his temper. Combined with his worsening drinking problem, Maddox concludes that Nicole had been considering divorce. She then plays another video. In it, Britt confides in her boyfriend, saying her father has become legit scary and that her mother has been crying in bed. She plays another video. In this clip, Britt tells her followers that her house might be haunted. At that moment, Britt accepts Chris's request for a call. She cries. Chris gently tries to calm her. Britt mentions that her grandfather, Jeff, told her that no one gets a mercy trial unless they are guilty. Just then, Jeff appears and ends the call. The clock is ticking. Chris inhales deeply and asks to speak with his partner, Jack. Jack appears on screen. Chris asks Jack to walk him through the crime scene. He then asks Maddox for the crime scene files. She projects an immersive reconstruction of the crime scene based on the available footage. Jack notices a broken vase, suggesting that Nicole may have tried to defend herself by swinging it at her attacker. Moments later, Jack enters the kitchen. Chris asks Maddox about the footprints. "Your daughter's," Maddox replies. Chris asks Maddox to zoom in near the countertop. Jack theorizes that Nicole might have thrown a plate at the attacker while backing away, prompting the killer to grab the nearest knife.
Chris asks about the fingerprints on the knife. Maddox confirms they match his. He then asks about fiber evidence, which also points to him. Chris asks Maddox for Nicole's phone records.
Maddox scans and explains that 33% of her calls and messages were with Chris, 26% with Britt, 10% with her parents, and the remainder with friends and colleagues from Viking Shipping. He asks Maddox to search through Britt's videos. Maddox scans the footage, but reports that she couldn't find the number Nicole had sent the text to. Chris then asks about Nicole's work phone. Maddox says she has no record of Nicole owning a second phone. At that moment, an officer informs Jack that they have found a second phone inside Nicole's car. Maddox scans the device and informs Chris that the phone is not a work phone, but a burner phone unregistered in the municipal cloud, and there is only one number in its call history, and that number also belongs to a burner phone. Maddox calls the number, but the person on the other end immediately hangs up upon hearing that the call is from Mercy Capital Court. Maddox then tells Chris that the phone signal is coming from the vicinity of the Hollywood Red Zone. Jack immediately heads there in her vehicle. Chris's guilt rate drops slightly. Maddox performs another scan and pinpoints the caller's exact location. Jack spots a man who immediately runs when he sees her. Maddox identifies him as Patrick, a chef at the Hudson Hotel. Jack eventually catches Patrick. Maddox asks Patrick how he knows Nicole. Patrick explains that he met Nicole at a farmer's market and that they began meeting regularly at the hotel afterward. When Chris asks about the burner phones, Patrick explains that Nicole wanted to communicate privately, so he bought her a burner phone. Maddox then accesses the hotel's security cameras and rewinds to the estimated time of Nicole's death. Footage from the hotel kitchen shows Patrick working in the kitchen during that period. Chris quietly admits that it can't be Patrick. Maddox tells him that he's clearly not telling everything, noting how he could jump to the idea of an affair so quickly unless he already suspected something. Chris admits he isn't surprised about Patrick. He confesses that he had been letting his wife down lately.
Chris then finally reveals that when he arrived at work this morning, he reached for the bottle he kept in the car, but it was gone. He assumed Nicole had found it. Furious, he went home and confronted her. They argued because she had thrown away his bottle. In retaliation, he smashed her favorite vase. A shard of glass flew up and cut her. He says he offered to clean up the blood, which explains why Nicole's blood was found on his shirt. Chris admits that he genuinely doesn't remember what happened after that. Chris then asks Maddox to show him everyone that Nicole had regular contact with. He tells her to separate the names into friends and co-workers. He tells Maddox that he needs to speak with Patrick. When Patrick appears on screen, Chris asks Patrick if Nicole had any trouble at her job. He reveals that Nicole had been dealing with an issue at work. Someone had been stealing chemicals from the company, and after a customer reported missing materials in a shipment, her boss asked Nicole to investigate. Chris turns his attention to Nicole's colleagues. Maddox points out that all of them are at work today, and that none of them have been within a mile of his neighborhood since Sunday. Chris contacts Jack, saying he has a hunch, and instructs her to check out the Viking Depot. Maddox checks the street cameras. Of the 46 cars that passed by his house this morning, not a single one stopped. Chris asks Maddox how many employees drove their own vehicles from Viking Shipping Company. 4 vehicles, she replies. She tracks Rob's vehicle as it is the first to enter a street at 2:30 p.m., but Chris notices that Rob wasn't alone. There were 3 passengers with him. He tells Maddox he needs to speak with Rob. On the call, Chris asks Rob about the people he gave a ride to. Rob names Carla, Marie, and Leo. Chris then asks whether they all left together after the party. Rob shakes his head, saying he ended up driving Deborah and Bill home and the others made their own arrangements. Chris asks Maddox to replay one of Britt's videos, the one featuring the sleeves bag. Chris and asks Maddox to access his department logs to confirm the time. According to the records, he was still at the precinct when the video was recorded. Finally, he asks Maddox to connect him to Britt. He asks about the video Britt posted on Instagram the previous night. She then explains that she heard what sounded like a door closing. She checked the house but didn't find anything unusual.
Chris asks Maddox to replay the video. He notices the basement door is slightly open. Maddox enhances the image, confirming his suspicion. The killer may never have left the house after the barbecue on Sunday. Instead, he could have stayed hidden and killed Nicole on Tuesday. Chris begins searching Nicole's email for anything related to missing stock. He comes across repeated references to UG, or Rio Grande. After scanning the data, Maddox reports that over the past 6 months, every shipment to BioBeauty has shown discrepancies. Each delivery docket lists an additional 50-kilo container, even though the physical orders match the original quantities. Chris asks if they are being overcharged, and Maddox clarifies that the physical inventory is correct. It's the paperwork that's altered. They access Holt's inbox and find an email from Friday requesting an urgent meeting with Nicole. Maddox immediately pulls up security footage from Viking Shipping. In the video, Holt and Nicole appear to be arguing. He asks Maddox to retrieve Holt's financial records from the past 6 months. Then, Chris spots something significant. Rob transferred Holt $4,000, possibly to help him out. Chris contacts Rob, but Holt answers the call instead. Maddox tells Holt to put Rob on the line. He offers to look for Rob and steps away. Holt returns to the call and claims he cannot find Rob. Frustrated with Holt's innocent act, Chris accuses him directly of killing Nicole after she discovered he was stealing chemicals. Holt insists that Rob is the one who was stealing the chemicals. He admits that both he and Nicole discovered the theft, but chose not to report Rob because he had always been good to them. Rob had even helped Holt financially when he was in trouble. Chris demands to know where Rob is. Holt says he just learned that Rob left work early because he felt sick. The manager allowed him to leave, especially since Rob had called in sick the previous day as well. The last time Holt saw Rob was at the barbecue. Rob stayed behind after everyone else left to speak with Nicole privately. He also asked Holt to take his car on Sunday so he could give rides to the co-workers who had arrived with him. Maddox tracks Rob's vehicle and discovers it is at his home. Chris instructs Jack to go to Rob's house while Maddox notifies the local SWAT team. The SWAT team arrives at Rob's house and forces entry, but Rob is not inside.
Chris asks him to hold that photo closer and notices that half of the picture has been torn away. At Chris's request, Maddox scans the image. Inside the garage, they discover burned papers deliberately destroyed. The officers then discover containers of Urea Grande, along with a truck license plate and physical maps. And Chris immediately alerts the officers. Maddox scans all available local traffic cameras and finally locates Rob, determining that he is driving a truck carrying approximately 3,000 pounds of explosives and heading toward downtown. As she cross-references facial recognition data, another shock emerges. The boy beside Rob is David Webb, the man Chris previously sentenced to Mercy Court. It turns out David Webb is Robert Webb's younger brother. The truth becomes clear. This was never about Nicole. It was about Chris and about Maddox. Rob is seeking revenge. Chris relays the findings to the authorities and warns them that Mercy Court is the intended target. Chris attempts to call Britt, but footage shows Britt outside speaking with Rob before he forcibly takes her. Chris orders Jack to pursue Rob. At that moment, an officer shouts that there is a bomb inside the garage. The team scrambles to evacuate, but the explosion detonates, killing several officers. Police vehicles pursue Rob's truck. Maddox informs him that Rob is now 3 minutes away from Mercy Court. Chris tells Jack he needs to speak to Rob directly. Maddox instructs Jack to position her air unit in front of the truck. Then she hacks into the truck's radio frequency and opens a communication channel. Rob speaks first. Rob admits that his brother had problems, but insists he could have helped him. Instead, Chris sent him to Mercy Court. Rob says he wanted Chris to sit in that chair knowing he was innocent, the same way his brother did. Suddenly, Jack fires at the truck. Chris shouts at her, demanding to know what she is doing. Maddox overrides Jack's vehicle systems. Rob speeds forward and crashes through the entrance of Mercy Court. Chris yells at Maddox to release him from confinement. He takes the elevator to the lower level and grabs an officer's vest and earpiece, allowing Maddox to maintain contact. Rob shouts for Chris to come out. Chris steps forward and asks Rob to let Britt go. Rob refuses. Then Maddox appears on a nearby screen. Calmly, she addresses Rob, telling him that if David was truly innocent, he should prove it. Rob agrees to explain. He says his brother struggled with drug addiction, so he tried to help him, giving him money and a phone to stay in contact. Then, out of nowhere, David was accused of murdering a woman. He claims he was on the phone with his brother at the exact time of the murder. Britt bites Rob's hand. Chris lunges forward and manages to rip the detonator from Rob's grip. Chris raises his gun at Rob, but Britt pleads with him not to do it. Breathing heavily, Rob insists that after speaking with his brother, he called the precinct to confirm the call history. Suddenly, Jack shoots Rob. Chris shouts at her to stand down. With his last strength, Rob repeats that he called the precinct. A woman answered, promising to check the records. Maddox verifies the claim. There was indeed an incoming call from Rob that night. Chris slowly turns toward Jack and tells her that she was the officer who processed and booked David Webb. Chris instructs Maddox to bypass internal access protocols using his credentials and pull Jack's body camera footage from the evidence room. Jack is seen taking David's phone from the evidence room and later discarding it. Jack argues that mercy court was necessary. Because of it, crime rates dropped. Sacrifices had to be made. The officers arrest both Rob and Jack, and that is how the movie comes to an end.